First of all, POC in the POC mid-1970 nuclear weapons initiative was driven and framed by a combination of factors that delivered great uncertainty to South Korea. Um, we had an ongoing and by then certain U.S. abandonment, if I may use that word, of South Vietnam, and we can disagree as to the validity of that war or finesse how it came to an end, but the fact is that the body politic and leadership of South Korea viewed what occurred as nothing less than a slow roll abandonment by two successive U.S. administrations of Vietnam. An abandonment that was abetted by the U.S. Congress and was accepted and rationalized by a U.S. public that had become disillusioned by the U.S. commitment there. But for the South Koreans, the U.S. ROK alliance notwithstanding, to them the writing was on the wall in terms of not the U.S. ability to abandon them, or not the willingness of it, but rather the ability to do so if the tide turns against the commitment to Korea. Second, even though North Korea at that time had no nuclear weapons capability, the U.S. had deemed it necessary to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in the ROK. This was to offset a growing North Korean conventional buildup, which neither the U.S. nor its alliance partner, South Korea, judged that they could together match. The extreme forward positioning of the North Korean assault forces and the ability that this positioning gave to Pyongyang to launch tomorrow, when coupled, I think, with the inherent vulnerability of the city of Seoul itself, plus other constraints on both the ROK and the U.S. defense budgets, reinforced the assessment that conventional deterrence was no longer in the cards. That is, deterrence, as was available, was not sufficient to dissuade Pyongyang for attempting to repeat what they'd done in June 1950. Thus, the presence of tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea was not a luxury. It was deemed to be an absolute necessity. The POC team shared this assessment, but they also knew that if the U.S. ground forces were withdrawn, the tactical nukes would go with them. South Korea, in that case, would be at the greatest risk of renewed conflict since the Korean War. They would be outmatched, outgunned, and the initiative would remain with the North Koreans. Now, with that conflict in the mid-1970s, just a mere 20 years in the rearview mirror, all of this was very much on the minds of the South Korean leadership, not to mention the South Korean public. Third, I think in mounting his covert nuclear weapons program, POC knew, and this is important, that the international nonproliferation regime was then ill-formed with numerous deficiencies and loopholes, all of which afforded South Korea a window of opportunity to induce sensitive core elements of a nuclear weapons program, which would be essential to building and sustaining such a program. His advisors confirmed this to him, but they also injected the concern that time was of the essence. Deals for these technologies had to be made quickly, and deals were made quickly. They got ahead of us, and just catching up to where the Koreans were in this particular gambit took a lot of time, too much time. I think fourth, if the POC government had any doubts as to the necessity of acquiring a sovereign nuclear deterrent, that doubt was erased by the advent of the Jimmy Carter administration. Arriving on the scene as it did, a mere 16 months after the U.S. forced POC to give up his nuclear program. Once again, American unpredictability and a waning commitment to South Korea was on display as Carter, both publicly prior to his election and in the government-to-government discussions in the immediate aftermath of the election, made it clear that he was determined to withdraw the U.S. on-the-ground nuclear deterrent, as well as the majority of the American ground forces that accompanied it. In the book, I described the U.S. shutdown of the ROK effort to acquire a sovereign nuclear deterrent as a close-run thing. And with Carter's obsession to remove our tactical nuclear forces from South Korea and and Pak's realization what that meant for his country, it was indeed a close-run thing. Carter's single-minded determination to deliver on his campaign promises related to the U.S. posture in the ROK also managed to validate and reinforce every concern on the part of Pak and his national security establishment that the U.S. could not be trusted to ensure their country's survival. The fact that the entire U.S. national security establishment, almost to a man, including the U.S. military, disagreed with Carter only reinforced with Pak and company that in giving up their nuclear weapons program, South Korea had then made the wrong decision. The 4 years of Carter-infused distrust that ensued left a lasting impression on multiple generations that, no matter what was said with sincerity today, by way of assurance, could not be reasonably expected to endure tomorrow. So I think, if anything, the Clinton-inspired Agreed Framework Agreement and the more recent Trump short-lived embrace of North Korea, that could have gone many ways detrimental to Seoul, served to reinforce that unpredictable element of U.S. foreign policy.